Okay, good.
Over to you, Cheryl.
Okay, hello. I had a little technical difficulty that I didn't realize that when I'm in full screen view, I couldn't see my notes. So I quickly printed those off. Okay, so welcome today to the Peter Robinson Settlers presentation. I discovered his story a few years ago when I was doing a presentation on immigration. And I really like his story. So I wanted to make a full presentation about him. So here we go today. So thank you. And are you ready to find out about Peter Robinson? First, I have to say happy St. Patrick's Day, which I know is yesterday, but nobody just celebrates for one day. So we're celebrating Irish Connections in March. Do you have Irish ancestors? And if you do, when did they come to Canada? Because that could be a clue to finding out more about them. So where do we look to find our family stories? If they came as a group, like the Peter Robinson settlers, they're a lot easier to research. The Peter Robinson settlers are a special group of early Upper Canada settlers, and they really do have a special story, and they are well documented. So if you can connect back to this group, you're going to find a lot of information. And just to say, these are before the what we know as the potato famine, Irish immigration. It's that was in the 1840s to 50s, earlier, but they were already having trouble with failed crops and people not being able to support themselves. And so that's why he was asked to do this special settlement. But first, I want to just tell you a little bit about Peter Robinson himself. And for those of us in this area, have a lot of loyalist connections. And so I just wanted to put this in, that he was the son of a loyalist. His father was Lieutenant Christopher Robinson. He was from a prominent Virginia family, and he served under John Graves Simcoe, and they settled the Queens Rangers, and they settled in New Brunswick. And he had one son, Peter, born in 1785 in New Brunswick. He had another son, John, was born in Quebec in 1791, and William was born in Kingston in 1797. And then they moved to York in 1798. And so it was quite a time that of moving around and a lot of changes, major changes at that time, people coming up from the States after the war, the Loyalists, and he ended up in York. Sadly, his father died the same year that they moved to York. So his mother, Esther Sayer, she married in 1802 to Elisha Beeman, and he was a prosperous York tavern keeper. So there's part of the story. And they moved to the Newmarket district. And Peter and his stepfather and his step siblings were working in the fur trade at that time. And so Peter became very familiar with the land and the water routes in the backwoods of Upper Canada. And this was key to being offered to bring settlers here later on. He was involved in the War of 1812. He raised a rifle company and of mainly experienced woodsmen, which would be who he knew and who would do well navigating in the backwoods. So Captain Robinson served with Major General Isaac Brock at the surrender of Detroit by the Americans, and that's when Detroit was called Sandwich. Actually, it's in Windsor. So, and there's a statue there of Brock and commemorating that battle. He also helped to maintain lines of communication with York during the blockade of Michilimackinac, and he was present when York surrendered to the Americans in April 1813. So he had quite a military service of his own, besides his father. But once the war was over, then there was peace. And so then he became part of the Legislative Assembly in 1817. And my notes are very small. He was invited by his brother John, who was the Attorney General of Upper Canada in 1822, to travel to London. And they met with Robert Wilmot Horton, who was the Undersecretary of the State of the Colonies. And they were working on an immigration scheme. And they needed somebody who knew the land, who knew the backwoods. And so that's why he was put in that position, because of his experience. So they put together the scheme, and it was very successful, the first one in 1823, and we'll get into more details later on. And it was so successful in 1823 that then they asked him to do it again in 1825. And that one again was very successful and a lot larger. But then the tide turned. And because he took care of his settlers so well, they decided it was too expensive, and he didn't do another one. He actually rebelled against the reforms that they were bringing in, and he resigned his position in protest for the government not supporting the settlers the way that he thought that they should be supported. And he died in I don't have it on here. Sorry, he died July the 8th, 1838 in York at the age of 53. But he had strong convictions. And I think that knowing where he came from and how he conducted himself and the standard that he demanded for the settlement really contributes to the success of the settlements. And so now we're going to talk about the actual settlers. So they put out a note as a flyer to invite people to come as settlers from Ireland to Upper Canada. And he was going to be in charge of it. And they would be furnished for their journey. They would be, assisted by the government to pay for their voyage over and to take care of them for a year. And the reason for this is because they were appealing to Irish paupers. And this was people who could not support themselves because of the failed crops and because of landowners having to make adjustments and not having as many tenants and raising their rents. And so this was a way of the government to try and solve this problem and give these people a chance to get on their feet and not be dependent on the government, really. And so the conditions were that they had to be under 45, and that every male above the age of 18, but not over 45, that he would be given 70 acres of land, which to them probably sounded like winning the lottery if you could get in. And so they took applications, and he put together his list of settlers. And this was from the County Cork, and they would have sailed out of Cork down here. And they had 2 ships. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. I better look at my notes. Okay, so how did they come? So I love this picture. I just had to put it in my presentation. It's a friend of my mom's took this in Halifax in the harbor when one of the tall ships was in port, and a cruiser coming in behind it. It would have been nice if they could travel in a cruiser like that, but nope, they had to go by ship. And so it's not enough to say that they went by ship. You have to think about how they went. And so in 1823, they sent 2 ships, and they were the Heb, not sure how to pronounce that. It looks French to me. And the Stakesby. And so he arranged for 568 paupers to sail on 2 ships. And they went to Quebec City. And each one of the ships, at his request, had to have a medical officer, because one of the problems of going across is people get sick. They're crammed into small quarters. They're there for a long time, and there's not much ventilation. And so it's very easy for people to get sick. And so he insisted that they needed to carry an experienced medical officer with them. And what's great is we have access to those reports now of how many got sick, who got sick on the ship, which is really cool. So in his 1824 report, he said that during the voyage, nothing happened of importance. The rations were abundant and comfortable. The men were allowed to have cocoa for breakfast. That was probably a treat. And nearly half a pint of spirits, which was perhaps not too much. The children were allowed tea and sugar. And the best proof of the attention paid to them on the voyage, aside from good health, is that only 1 woman and 8 children died on the passage, and that was from smallpox. And unfortunately, it got into both the ships, not from any causes that could be foreseen. And so it is remarkable that they were having these luxuries, and they truly must have thought they won the lottery. Okay, so it was an 8-week sea voyage. From Quebec, they boarded onto steamships and then barges and then wagons for the rest of the journey. They settled in the townships of Ramsey, Parkenham, Bathurst, Lanark, Beckwith, Goulbourne, Darling, and Huntley in the Ottawa Valley. And so here's a map. This was the districts in 1825. So they were settling in the Bathurst district up in here. And here's a little map to show you the townships. And it's very important in early times to know which township that they settled in, because that's where you're going to find the records, and that's where you want to look. So knowing which township they settled in, and yes, you will be able to find that because they were well documented. So here's a little map of the townships in the Bathurst district in 1824. But they were not the only people who were settled in that area. And so they came across a little bit of trouble. And these were Irish paupers. They were Roman Catholic, and they were trying to start their communities. At the same time, there were military settlements in that area where regiments had disbanded and had started settlements there. And the problem being that the military, they were mostly Protestant, and they were jealous actually, from what I've been reading, is that they were jealous that the Peter Robinson settlers got so much support and a year's supply and a cabin built for them and all of these things, and they didn't get the same thing. And so they had a militia, and at the militia meeting in 1824, you go and you practice, and you're going to be on, that if something happens, you're going to be ready to be called upon, which they were all there. But afterwards, they were drinking, and comments get passed back and forth. People get offended. People start pushing, and they had problems where they were in a drunken, riotous state, is what it says. And who knows who started it, but there was a lot of feelings about between the Protestants, the Catholics. How come you got all these privileges and we've had to work so hard for this? We served in the military, we should be getting, benefits. What have you done to get these? And so it caused a lot of problem, and it ended up that one of the Irish was killed by gunshot, and that to put it down, and peace was restored. But this was something that put a little bit of a blemish on Peter Robinson's settlers. And so they wanted to do it again, but with this happening in 1824, they didn't do it until they made sure that all of this was settled. So I gathered a few names of the books, and the handout that I gave you doesn't give you a lot of notes. It just gives you links to places to look for your ancestors. So if you have Peter Robinson settlers, and also these books, just in general, the Irish that settled in the area, these are some of the suggestions. The Valley Irish was very good. Of course, the Peter Robinson settlers gives the whole story. This new one, Early Ottawa Valley Records, is very helpful. And what I did in the handout was, I gave you the links to these books on global genealogy, because on his site, they make an index of the names that you find in the book. So you're able to check and see if the surname that you're looking for is in that book before you go ahead and order it. And what I also like about him is you can get a PDF download and just upload it to your Kindle. And I just have a free Kindle account, and I can read it on my computer or on my phone. And so I don't have any affiliation with Global Genealogy, but I do recommend checking them out, because he usually has very good deals on things. Okay, so those are just some resources if you are part of the Peter Robinson settlers that went to the Ottawa Valley in 1823. So it was so successful that they said, let's do it again. So he's back in London, he's setting it up, and this time takes a little bit longer to get them together. And they offered it again, but this time they had 50,000 people apply, which is an outrageous amount. And how do you screen? So he had to call upon the magistrates, the local governing people at that time, and he narrowed it down to 2,024. It was supposed to be 2,000, but he did go a little bit over. And he was supposed to be Roman Catholics, and he did put a couple Protestants in there as well, just because he couldn't, he justified why that they should come. So he had 2,024 on 9 ships. And they were the Fortitude, the Resolution, the Albion, the Brunswick, the Star, the Amity, the Regulus, Elizabeth, and John Barry. And what's cool is that we have passenger lists surviving for all of these ships, and the surgeon's reports as well. And I've got links to that in the handout. So they sailed from Cobb Harbor in Cork. They all arrived in Quebec by the end of June. So he set them all off. And what I was reading is he actually, instead of just writing their names in a register, he gave them paper, gave them a certificate. And some of them tried to sell it for somebody else to come, but it had to be them. They couldn't give it to somebody else. And he had them all on board. He made sure that these were the people. He had the local magistrates there to confirm this is the person that's coming and they're of good character. And he did everything that he could to make sure that these are the people that he had chosen to come and start the settlement, and that they were going to be his best choices for making this a success. And then he sent them off on their 9 ships. And then he went back down. He went across, I think, to Liverpool. He went back down. He secured the supplies that were going to be needed to support them for a year. And then he came across to New York, went up from New York to York, and checked out, got all the land stuff he needed there. And once they got it to Quebec, they started sending them down to Kingston. Some of them were in Kingston. And so he was supposed to go to Kingston, but because he was really about his settlers, he took a detour into the area to check, to make sure that everything was ready and everything was the way that it was supposed to be before he came down to Kingston to meet them there. And he stayed with them. He slept in the tent just along with them. And they were in pretty good shape, except that the temperature at that time, that summer, was over 100. And people were sick. And people had got ship's fever because they were pretty packed into those ships. And there had been several deaths during the voyage, but he got them to Kingston. He sent them by steamboat down to Coburg. And then they put them on wagons up to the Peterborough area. The road wasn't, they went on the river as much as they could. They fixed the roads. He went to the local districts there. They got money. The people that were with his party, they all worked together to fix the roads to get these people up to Peterborough. And next, I have a map. And so the Bathurst was here, but Newcastle is here. And so they went to Coburg, and then they're up into this area. And the townships that he went in, which was the Newcastle district, was I can't say that, Afasod, Duro, Dummer, Emily, Ennismore, the Gore of Emily, Smith, and Otonabee townships. And they're all on this map. And so you can see the areas that they settled in this district. So he settled these people here. And in 1826, the next year, he had a letter of appreciation from them signed by 52 people that how much they appreciated. He stayed with them. He, I think one or two of the surgeons stayed with them just to make sure that they were okay. They all ended up getting sick. He got sick, but he still stayed with them. And he just made sure that they were totally taken care of. And I just want to see what they gave them. So they made sure that they had a log cabin built, and they had tools, and they had seed potatoes, they had seed corn, and they were given to be successful. And here's a display from the Trent Archives in Peterborough of some of the tools that they were given when they started out. And there's a plaque there acknowledging the Robinson settlement. And I think it was 1827, they renamed it Peterborough after him, just because they appreciated him so much. This is the report, and one of the links in your handout is, it's a really long report that he made that details all the things that he did for them and why he did them. And a lot of the information that I'm telling you is out of there. At the bottom was this. So settled in the Newcastle district and the Bathurst district, how many men and women and children, how many stayed with friends in Lower Canada. So they came to Quebec and they stayed there with people that they knew there. Two of them stayed in Kingston, and a few were absent, and 145 died at sea or in Canada after they arrived. So there was 224 who left Cork. There was 69, which was 15 born at sea and 54 in Canada, for 69 new babies. And joined in Canada, there was 15. So in total, in the 24th of November, 1826, he had 2,108 people in that settlement. And he also sent a report of what they produced, which is really cool. So it's the number of acres that were cleared, the potatoes, bushels of turnips, bushels of corn that were produced, wheat, maple sugar that was made and purchased by themselves, meaning they've earned money and now they're buying their own livestock, which must have just been to leave what they left in Ireland. And now they're able to buy oxen, cows, and hogs. That's just amazing. And so he really showed that the money that they invested in him to start these settlements was really coming back. They were producing. They were making something of the opportunity that they were given. So I also have some books that are good for the Peterborough area. And again, the Peter Robinson one. This one was a little booklet that was put out for the anniversary. And this is a brand new one that I just found last night as I was looking through the website. So there's a new one coming out. So he has an enduring legacy. He established the settlement in Ontario, the first Monday of August. The first Monday of August is a civic holiday for Canada or for Ontario. In Toronto, it's Simcoe Day, but in Peterborough, it's Peter Robinson Day. And I didn't know that. And so they've had a festival there. I am sure that in 2025, there will be some kind of celebration, the anniversary of the beginning of the settlement. And so watch for that. Catherine mentioned that I use Pinterest. So I have a research board for Peter Robinson settlers. So as I'm researching, I haven't added the ones that I added to this presentation, but I will go through them. And so if you go to my Pinterest board on Peter Robinson settlers, you can go directly to some of the resources that I've used. Okay, there's also a project that they're calling back to Ireland. And I found this website, and it's in your handout, where they're connecting people who stayed in Ireland to the people who came over in Peter Robinson's settlement. And so they're wanting to contact descendants, and it's really cool. They have a whole site with historic graves, and it would be where the families that stay behind are buried, and make a connection there. Probably as well, if you found the parish that they were from. There's just a lot of information on the Ballet Harar site and the historic graves, and those are in your handout. So as I'm going through this, I found a surprising connection that I may possibly have a connection. My grandchildren have Haggerty in their tree, and Marmaduke Haggerty, which I love his name. And I think that his father was a brother of the William that came with the settlers. William died shortly after he arrived. He got sick on ship. He's on the list. And then the brothers came over to help the widow and the children and settled here. I haven't done all of the research I need to do to confirm that this is for sure, but that's where I'm going. If there's anybody in the Quinte area that's on here that has Haggerty connections, I would be interested in contacting you to confirm that they are actually descendants of the Peter Robinson settlement. So that would be cool. So if anybody does, I would like to confirm that. So I've spent a lot of time on Peter Robinson, and it's a very interesting story. But even if you don't connect to Peter Robinson, you need to learn when you're doing your family history, you need to know the history around the area where your family lived, where they came. And the more you know, the more it builds your story. So if you say, oh, they were Irish and they came to Peterborough and then they moved down to the Quinte area, and I just know that they're Irish, is not as interesting if you don't know all the background story. So by connecting into Peter Robinson's story, I have now added a whole lot of information to the story of your ancestors if you descend from those settlers. But you can do it for the area that you're in too. What area did your ancestors come to? Why did they come there? How did they come there? Find out if there's a bigger story. Were they part of a group? Were they, it's one thing to say, oh, we were Irish, but to know which group that came and what the circumstances are makes a big difference in your family history and building those stories out for your ancestors. Were they founding families of an area? Did they come with government assistance, or did they come on their own? Find out those things. Find out the history of the location that your family members lived in. So when was your hometown founded? That could be a clue, because these settlers were new. They opened up those areas. And you want to be able to find those. Watch for anniversaries of the celebrations. Who were the founding families? See if the surnames are the same. Even if they weren't the original founding families, did they come over later to join family members? Have you checked to see if your ancestors were included in those lists? And where are the records of those early families? And see if there's a connection. If they came and then moved to another area, that could break your brick wall to know that they came with that group and then moved somewhere else. And what part did your family play in historical events? I gave you information about Peter Robinson's father, who was a loyalist and went to New Brunswick, and then how they were born there. Then they went to Quebec and another child's born. They went to Kingston, another child's born. What part did they play? What part did they play in the American Revolution, if you can trace back that far? What part did they play in the War of 1812? What part did they play in any other historical event in the area that you're from? See if you can find out, because that would have influenced them. Even if they didn't take part in it, it would have influenced what was going on at that time. So gather your family stories, ask the older generations, and tell the younger generations. You want to share this. You don't want to hoard all this information and not pass it on. We want to find out our stories and we want to pass them on. Record them and share them. And who has the photos? This is a photo of me. I'm the little girl. It doesn't look like I'm very interested at this point. And I am now. And this is my mom, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother. And I remember my great-grandmother very well, but not everybody has that connection. So ask and then find out the stories from your own family. And then piece it all together, because it is your story. It is the story of your family and where your family came from. And we want to do that in order to share that. So where do we go from here? Are you ready to explore your family history? Find out why your ancestors came to this new land of Canada, how they came, and who they came with, if you can. And that's my presentation on Peter Robinson's settlements. Do we have any questions?
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, there's a bunch of comments and questions in the chat, so I'll just kind of go through them and address them as they came in.
Okay.
So we'll start with sorry.
And I wasn't watching the chat.
No problem. So just some people commenting that their ancestors came in the 1930s. I have Scottish-Irish ancestors that from Sligo that came in 1821.
So they came a little bit before.
Yeah, Denise says yes. Also, settlers 1825 settled in Downeyville. So some of these are just comments. Michelle says yes. Daly and Quinlan ancestors were Peter Robinson settlers. Nan says she has a booklet published in 1975 called The Peter Robinson Settlement of 1825. This booklet was published as part of the Homecoming 75 in Peterborough. Fascinating story. All the ships are outlined, and my Fitzgerald ancestors were on the Star.
And that's on the handout as well. So the link is there to if somebody wants to get a copy of that. I have one.
Perfect. Yeah, the handout is very comprehensive. Michelle says my ancestors, Hogan from Peterborough, Murphy from Lindsay. Ken says the booklet referenced by Nan in the chat, I think you mentioned this also, right? The Peter Robinson Settlement of 1825 can be found on Family Search.
Oh, good.
Can be read from the comfort of one's own home. And he put the link to the Family Search location in the chat if anybody wants to take a look at that.
Awesome.
Carolyn says Montgomery, 1829, from Lord Farnham's estate in County Cavan to Lanark County.
And knowing what estate they came from is good too.
Denise says apparently they disliked the food on board ships during the 1825 voyage, especially cheese. They were not used to this kind of food and missed potatoes.
Change of diet.
Lyndon says, hi, my spouse's family were the Hurley family, listed as Hurley in the 1825 Brunswick records.
Awesome.
This, Valerie says, this is the area of my husband's mother's family, born in Maberly, Lanark County, connected way back to the Dixon Kirkham families in the later part of the 1700s. Ken says the ship Hebe, I think, is named after the Greek goddess of youth, daughter of Zeus and Hera, and is generally pronounced as Hebe.
There you go.
Barbara says, I found who I believe was the brother of my third great-grandfather, who was assisted with the military back around 1816 or so, found the ship listed at LNA. Cindy, thank you so much. The global genealogy information is excellent. Trish, why did he concentrate on Cork for his settlers?
I think because that was one of the areas that was hit with the failure of the crops, and the estates there were raising the rent to compensate that, and they couldn't afford it. And so they had a lot of people. To think that 50,000 people applied, that's a huge amount. And so there were a lot of what we would term as unemployed. They were displaced and no way to support themselves. And so it was a way of the British government trying to find a solution to this, but also making sure that they didn't just load everybody in a ship and send them to Canada. They wanted to make sure that the settlers they chose are gonna be successful here. And that's why they had so much scrutiny on who was coming.
Perfect. Cindy had a question. Did some of the settlers remain in the Port Hope area? And if so, is there a way to find their names?
Possibly. I didn't look into where they all went from there. And so, and I forgot to mention, I watched a webinar last night. It was the Niagara branch OGS, and it was Jane McNamara, and she did a webinar on paths to patent. And it was how to find your ancestor who got crown land. And she will be writing a blog post about that this weekend, she said. So I gave you her blog in the information. It's called Where the Story Takes Me. So watch that. She has a lot of good blog posts on township records and finding other records that may be helpful to tracing them once they got here, and following. I didn't do anything about following the land. One of the links gives you the lot and concession that they settled on. So that would be a clue to find them on the map and then start to see, how they distributed the land and when they moved, if they sold the land when they moved.
Oh, great. Denise says some of the families that boarded the ships traveled on other people's tickets. Some families chose not to leave and sold their space. One family had their 16-year-old son dress as a girl, so they fit the profile of the ticket, mother, father, and two girls.
There's always going to be people who try and fudge the lines, and but they're desperate, and they want this opportunity. It was a wonderful opportunity, and to be chosen to come, change the destiny of that family.
Elizabeth says, I think Cork was chosen because of the willingness of the clergy, major landowners to work with Robinson and his colleagues.
And you have to remember that for the most part, Britain was Protestant, with the Church of England, and a lot of issues with, the legal church, and so they specifically wanted to move Roman Catholics, which I thought was in
Right.
that time period is great.
Yeah. Karen says Global Genealogy will be giving a presentation at the Carlton Place and Beckworth Heritage Museum Sunday, April 23rd, 2 p.m., 267 Edmund Street, Carlton Place, Ontario. That is in the chat to everyone if you want to look at that. Denise says the ship sailed from Chob in Cork. I think that's how you pronounce it. Families coming from all surrounding areas, also from the estates of wealthy landowners that wanted the paupers gone.
There were differences, yeah. So some of them were put out. Some of them probably were causing trouble in that, you can't just put us out. You need to do something for us. We have no way to support ourselves. So it was the government's solution at that time to try and do
Yeah, cool. Paula says, just a reference, Asphodel, A Tale of a Township, author Jean Lancaster Graham, a good resource.
Oh,
That's
good.
that's in the chat if anybody wants to look that up. Heather wants to know if anyone is related to William Oakley, who came to Peterborough. Valerie Davis says, my husband's cousin, still living, married a Haggerty.
Ooh, okay.
Jeanette, did the 1825 group also come from Cork?
Yes. And
CF.
because they already knew that the 1823 group went out, some of them would have written home how good it was,
Right.
and so then they knew this was for real. So then they applied.
Right, now there's like 30 more comments, so I'm going to go a little bit more quickly. So the Earl of Kingston in Ireland sponsored many of the immigrants. Michelle says there are stories on ancestors and descendants being collected in Peterborough for a book for 2025.
Good.
Barbara says, to Cindy, my third great-grandfather and family came to the Hastings area in 1832 on a ship that nearly didn't make it. It limped back to Ireland and got fixed up and headed out again. That was all written up in a newspaper report, so that's another source. Linda, August 18th to 20th is the 200th celebration of Pakenham, Almont, and the celebrating the Irish settlement from Peter Robinson.
Good. I couldn't find anything in the Ottawa area, but I thought there must be something.
Yeah. Asphodel Norwood Cultural and Heritage will be hosting a 2025 celebration. 31 families settled in that township. Wayne wants to know, where are the Peter Robinson settler lists and surgeon diaries located?
The actual documents, I think, are in England, like in the archives there. But they have a link to them. So some of them are transcribed. I think I have a link in there to see some of them. I'm not sure, but follow the links for the ships and I'm not sure if I have it right back to the actual documents. So they are secondary, they're transcriptions.
Okay,
but
thanks.
then go looking for them.
Okay, then we have a couple of super presentation. Thank you. Excellent presentation. I'm looking forward to working through the handout. Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. I'm just it says, Elizabeth says the bulk of the Peter Robinson papers have been digitized and are available on Family Search.
Okay, good.
Ancestry has CO 384 records with relevant correspondence. Brenda wants to know why the focus only on Catholics. She has ancestors that came in 1826 but were Protestant.
And a lot of them were, and that's why this was different. They were trying to do something to help the Catholic, the problem among the Catholics.
Donna says, thanks. You've helped me realize my ancestors were not part of the Peter Robinson settlements. Were there any government schemes to relocate during the potato famine?
There were so many people that came over after that. So they would be a whole different group. And there's so many people died. They tried to get them out of there. So that's a whole other. And these ones in 1823 and 1825 were not part of the potato famine, like what we would know as the big one.
Peter wants to know, where can copies of the embarkation certificates be found?
Maybe in England at Kew, the National Archives in Kew, possibly. I think I have one of the links is to there, but I would think that they would keep them there rather than bringing them to Canada, because it's a British government program. So I would think that they would be stored there. And he did go to London afterwards.
Yeah, Elizabeth replies later on in the chat, originals of embarkation certificates are at the Peterborough Museum and Archives. I think that
awesome.
AO microfilms also contain the certificates. Family search microfilms differ from those.
So maybe they brought them with them then, or maybe he was making sure that they were the same people who got on the ships.
Yeah, these comments are all to everyone in the chat. If anybody wants to look at this, there's a sample of a McCarthy certificate of embarkation. Terry says Haggerty Genealogy Resources at Quinte Branch Research Library, an excellent resource. Penelope says, thank you so much for the excellent presentation. Phyllis wants to know if she can share the handout with others.
Yeah, it's just a list of links that I used and that I found. So yes, share it. If you can find your ancestors, the more places we have to look, the more clues that you can find, and breaking it down to an area or a township, really, you're going to get more detailed information.
Somebody just asked me to drop the handout in the chat again, so I will do that right now. Was everyone on the McCabe list a Robinson settler? Crystal wants to know.
I'm not familiar what the McCabe list is.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of the questions. Patrick says, very good presentation, Cheryl. Thank you. Peter says, surgeon books are available on Amazon. Oh, Elizabeth says, actual documents are at the Peterborough Museum and Archives, but not diaries. Enjoy the presentation. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Most informative. Peterborough Museum, you need an appointment. Apparently, that's a note from Denise. Thank you for the presentation. Check out this so there's a Facebook page called Peter Robinson Settlers in Canada.
Yep, it's on the handout. It's on the handout.
Okay, awesome. So that's the end of the questions. I mean, there may be more that come in. I know that this presentation has been recorded and we will be posting it on the Quinte Branch members section. So Jane Simpson, are you on the call?
I have one more thing before we go.
Okay, so we'll let
I work for the National Institute, and we just had a Roots Tech special, and she has authorized me to pass this on to anyone who's on the call today, that she will extend this, that if you buy a package of 4 courses or more, you'll get a free course with that. And so just email her and let her know that you were on my presentation today and you can get a free course. So if you wanted to, a lot of what I used in my other immigration, there's Canadian immigration courses, there's getting to know Irish ancestors, there's, you know, how to gather information. So if you want to do that, and I noticed that I did not put a link to that, so I need to give you that link, because I didn't give you a link to where you can find the courses. So we'll put that in the chat.
Okay, and I'm just adding to the chat the link to Wayne's video. So we have a little technical problem in terms of displaying it right now. So Wayne's video on how to use the Quinte Branch website is now in the chat.
Okay, and I'm just going to get to a link, whoops, to the packages.
And I think Jane now would like to say a word or two. Jane Simpson.
Yes.
I would. Can I start my video?
Yes, of course.
It says I can't. You've stopped it.
Aren't I mean? Well, I'll start it then. How's that?
Thank you. There, I think I have. Yes.
There you go.
Well, oh my goodness, Cheryl, how to thank you for all this. Thank you for your best wishes for a belated happy St. Patrick's Day, but it always goes well. And thank you for handling all those comments and questions so graciously. Obviously, you've sparked something there in the community of these places, their ancestors.
Good.
Thank you for bringing to our attention the life force of this person who stood up to the government of the day. When you presented the man, and he's so remarkable in his caring attitude toward the settlers, instead of our usual settler story where they come over with a rather greedy individual and who wants to scupper thereafter. So this was marvelous. The other thing is for putting this portrayal of who the settlers were, the impoverished, the paupers, and that were coming to us. And then to bring up that wonderful graph of the productivity of these people and what they did with what they were given, because this man gave them the right foundation to get going. And as a student nurse in Kingston, when I got there and discovered the number of Irish and heard the Irish history, I was thankful that you had touched on that. So I hope we'll see you before the next year with a presentation, and Quinte Branch would love to have you there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording.